And then I get really curious about what it means to have gone as far down into the well of ourself as we can, and then come to work from that place. I think we get really scared of internal friction, meaning like I can come to the edge of something that feels intolerable or what might be called re-traumatizing. But without that friction, I may not actually be able to evolve. It doesn't have enough to like push me in to the next evolution.
Welcome back to The Vital Point. I'm so glad you joined me for another episode rooted in breath, being, and deep work. If you've been following the show, you know we're crafting a space not just for insight, but integration, for turning inwards to connect to your own inner wisdom. My guest today is Christine Calvert, an addiction counselor, somatic practitioner, and certified holotropic breathwork facilitator. She's a module facilitator and teacher for the Groff Transpersonal Training, both in the US and internationally. In addition to bringing holotropic breathwork and other experiential workshops to mental health and addiction facilities, she's passionate about the ethics and integrity needed in facilitating expanded state work, supporting the integration of holotropic and psychedelic sessions through somatic resourcing and creative expression, personal ritual, and group support. I've had the pleasure of being present for Christine's facilitation and space holding in several of my own modules. And in fact, this episode was recorded a few months ago. At the end of it, we referenced the apprenticing that I did with Christine recently in Portland. And so being around Christine and her energy inspired me to ask her to be on the podcast. And I was thrilled when she said yes. Today's conversation is about, well, I think it's about a lot of things and goes into some deep water, but the theme that runs through the episode is about becoming good soil, letting ourselves compost, shed, and continually renew, about trusting each other's inner healers, embracing rupture, and learning to repair. It's an invitation to embodiment, to integrity, and to radical presence, not just theory, but lived. As we go deeper today, remember, ideas stay ideas unless they land. If you're ready to tend to your own process in community where you can reflect, explore, share what's alive after this podcast, join me in the Blue Magic Alchemy community on School. That's skool.com/Blue Magic Alchemy. It's a portal to not only listen to these conversations, but to live them, breathe them, and grow alongside others devoted to inner transformation. One last thing I'll say before we jump into the episode, I found a natural pace talking with Christine. There were some nice pauses for reflection and an opportunity to slow down. And rather than try to edit those out, I pretty much left them as is. So I hope that you can take some deep breaths to listen, to be fully present, and to slow down with us. All right, let's take a deep breath and dive in. I wanted to jump in with something that I noticed during the last module that we were doing together in February. And I was sitting next to you in one of the circles, and I noticed on your phone, you had a really cool like wallpaper picture that said, "Make me good soil." So I was curious like what that means to you and if you could just share about that. So it was really intriguing to me.
Yeah. Can I ask you a question first?
Sure.
Yeah, I'm
Love it.
curious like what came up for you when you saw it? Like what was the first like response in your body?
The first response in my body was a like a reminder to be present and open to support other people.
Mm-hmm.
I know like I have a little reminder on my phone that says remember who you are.
Yeah.
And that's been my kind of little reminder.
Yeah.
So I always think it's cool when people have that instead of maybe like a picture of their cat
Yeah.
or something like that. So
Mhm.
I think for me, I'm in this space where I'm trying to learn how to be a better facilitator and really learn how to navigate the waters in which folks like you are swimming.
Hmm.
And there's there's always an observation I find within those module spaces, and it's not necessarily like the facilitators are sitting down and saying, this is how you be a better facilitator. Obviously there is some of that, right? But it's just observing the way that you're showing up and the way that you're carrying yourself and just the way that you're holding space and showing up in the room.
Yeah.
And so yeah, that I think that was where my curiosity was like, oh, okay, is this part of your ethos or just part something that helps you remember?
Mm.
um yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that you noticed that. Thanks for bringing that up. It's both. I would say it's like both a part of my ethos and also a deep sort of reminder. And I'm reminded more these days of it because certain people will notice it, and
Mm.
at this point it's been on there for a while that I can forget, which um, is also part of it. And first of all, it's a quote from Sophie Strand, who's a brilliant author, um, writer, mythopoetic writer. And there's a lot in there, one relevant to the sort of holotropic work and just the work of like showing up both in that space as a facilitator, but also as somebody who's like very much on my own, personal journey. It sort of is this reminder to stay an apprentice to the
Mm.
like constant death and rebirth process. Um, that is always available to me, that is constantly happening on an internal level, so that I can like continue to shed and die to myself over and over again, and like continue to kind of decomposed or compost, these parts that are ready to turn over into new soil and into something that can provide something even richer if I allow that sort of death, if you will, to happen. So my teacher Tav Sparks from the Holotropic Breathwork really used to emphasize a lot. This work is so much about like honoring and knowing and giving sort of context to this constant like psycho spiritual death and rebirth that we're always in, and to be able to like remember that gives the quality of life so much more richness. So I could go on about that statement, but I'll stop there.
This is my curiosity, really, is just how to continue to show up for that. I had this experience um during the weekend module or weekend workshop that came before the module,
Hmm.
where um I'm doing other breath work all the time, and I'm still learning
Yeah.
the holotropic breath work as far as certification goes. And I had an experience where I was asking myself, is this really what you're signing up for? Like, is this really what you want to be doing? Um, just in response to another participant's experience.
Hmm.
And one of the things that I appreciate about GTT and my experience so far has been the permission to actually explore those types of feelings and share them. Because what comes up for me when that happens is, oh, I gotta like keep that inside and
Yeah.
not tell anybody, because if I do, they're gonna kick me out of the program or say like, well, you're obviously not ready to do this work.
Yeah.
um, but when I have shared it, I'm met with support and understanding and empathy, and just sort of like, yeah, you're a human being, of course, you have limitations and things that you're working on.
Yeah.
So uh, again, it's something where I'm really looking to the people that are holding the space in the room as teachers, and
Mm.
like, okay, how can I continue to deepen and embrace um, this ethos that you are embodying so well.
Mm. Yeah, I love that because I think for me when I came into the training, probably similar to most people, there is that sort of sense of like, okay, I'm here doing, my personal work, which is really messy, and then
Mm.
also I'm in a professional training. And so people are really going to see my stuff, and that was like a little bit intolerable to me in the beginning. I just didn't know how to like hold a wide enough container. They had to really show me by just sort of, um, as the way that like the facilitators show up, um, in so much like, you know, compassion and care was the teaching. But and I remember I had certified. I took about 4.5 years to certify in holotropic breathwork. And I was doing, I don't know, I was probably about 5 years into the work, and I went back and breathed as a participant. And I had one of the most like horrendous, excruciating, very messy, um, like process come up, something that I didn't totally know was there. Um, and my sense of it afterwards was like, holy shit, I've been like found out now. They're gonna like it's done. They're never gonna let me facilitate in this work. And it was like 9 hours on the breathwork floor, so it was really intense.
Wow.
Um, and I had a lot of stories about that. And the next day, as we were in the closing circles, when my mentor at the time and my friend now came up to me and said, I would love for you to work the next module with me. And it was my first invitation as a facilitator. And I thought, okay, either these people are completely insane or or they know what good soil is, and that's the same story for Tav. When Stan Groff like handed the training over, it was a very similar sort of moment in time of him being sort of in his very messy real process. And my sense was they had kind of been waiting for me to touch those places in myself, and to let myself be witnessed in that before they sort of really trusted me to be on the floor in the way that they knew that I could be, with other people. So yeah, it's a different kind of training in that perspective, from that perspective.
Mhm. So besides for that, like, sort of permission that came from that extra, or maybe not permission, but invitation that came from the external, what do you think changed within yourself after that experience and then going into the module?
Yeah, I mean, I think um, as this work does, it just allowed me to continue to get to know, um, deeper layers of my psyche and different expressions of it. And I think we all are. I can I feel fairly confident in saying like most of us, um, are pretty good at masking, or we have a million incredible intelligent protector parts, that know how to keep these other aspects of us from being seen, because historically letting them through, hasn't gone well for us. So there's that story, that overlay. And then, just the fact that there's various ways that trauma lives in the body, and um, learns to sort of find different pockets and, um, crevices and holes to live in. And uh, yeah, and with the breath work, the whole idea is like, especially for the training, is like how many, like, the reason it takes so long is because, we want people to have traversed this much territory as possible, so that when they see it in another, there's an integrity to the presence that we show up with, and there's an embodiment to that presence that we show up with, um, and it's not theoretical at that point. And so yeah, it sort of had that, finally, like I integrated that understanding where I was like, oh, this is important. And this is not rejectable. So one, I had a huge personal healing in being seen and still loved in this really dark space. And professionally, I understood a lot more about this work and the integrity that lies within it.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm constantly uh surprised by showing up in these containers, especially with, having other breathwork experience.
Hmm.
Just the difference in the way that space is held and just the container unfolds in that holotropic space, and also the community that creates within the container itself.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a
We
lot of
just
intimacy.
we just got back from the first advanced module for somatic experiencing, and
Oh, cool.
it was 6 days, and both, Sarai and I, my partner, were just kind of comparing notes in a way, because the holotropic modules are about 6 days, and just how it felt, the somatic experiencing felt so much more disconnected and less cohesive, because you're not in residential together, you're not taking meals
Yeah.
together, and um, it's almost like the bar has been set so high with the GTT modules that it's hard to like be in another space where that isn't being provided, especially when you're doing, that inner work.
Hmm. Yeah. I hear you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
On the other hand, it was nice to be in a place where finally, the instructor was saying, don't be afraid of re-traumatizing your clients. And, in his opinion, one of the biggest issues in somatic experiencing is that clinicians and practitioners are afraid of re-traumatizing their clients, and therefore they're not like really helping them maybe to the depth that they could be.
Hmm.
The example that he was using was, you're when your client's coming to you, they just want to be able to get on the plane next week without having a panic attack. They don't have months to learn how to track their felt experience and,
Mm.
things like that. um, they're coming to you for help, and I wonder if maybe that fear of re-traumatizing someone that you're working with does come from that lack of going and doing your own work in the way that we're encouraged to do in GTT. And just having that experience myself for a week of, no, like let's hang out in that trauma vortex. Let's get to know it and learn to build capacity for being in that space, has already had an immediate impact on my own work, and my willingness to like, oh, okay, like this is where you're at. Let's go there. Let's see if we can hang out and support you in that space. So it really seems like there's some value in doing your own work.
Yeah, what comes up for me when you say that is just, going back to one of the main, principles from the holotropic, which is the understanding and the absolute trust in this, in the inner wisdom and the inner healer of each person, which, I would also venture to say that, a person's nervous system and psyche is so intelligent that um, if it doesn't feel safe enough, it won't go into those places to begin with. Um, and I think there's a lot of nuance here, and I want to name that. I think there's a lot of nuance and there's a lot of complexity, and I think there's a lot about the nervous system that we probably don't know yet in terms of um, that. I think we have a lot of information more now than we ever have, but I'm not sure that it. I think we can tend to sort of silo the nervous system as like acting alone. And I think there's a lot of other components um, that are working with this. Some of them, nameable through like science and from where I sit, my belief is perhaps some that are uh, hard to capture through a scientific lens. I think the idea of the psyche is a really hard thing to capture through a scientific lens. So, or this idea of inner wisdom or inner intelligence. What does that actually mean, and how do we know that it's present? And that's something that's so subjective. Um, and so I think there's like a lot to hold in ourselves, sort of like from this maybe like kelp like wisdom that has a fluidity and doesn't live in a binary, that says like, if we do it this way we're going to traumatize people, or if we do it this way we're not. Because I think we're just way more complex than that, especially at this point in the world clock. There's a lot happening relevant to trauma. So anyway, I say all that, and then also I really trust the wisdom of and intelligence of each person. And I also work in somatic experiencing and then the holotropic, which back in the day, like I think about a decade ago, it was like they were really at opposing ends. The SE community didn't really love the expanded state community, and vice versa, the holotropic. And I think that actually goes pretty far back to where like Peter Levine and Stan Groff were hanging out at Esalen somewhere around the same time, doing different work. And yeah, I think there's like a need to sort of maybe bring in a little bit more willingness to understand what the idea of re-traumatization means. Because if the way that SE sees it, the way I was trained in SE is correct, then everything we're doing in holotropic would be re-traumatizing. And that's not what we're seeing. We're seeing quite the opposite. And I also think we're not, there's a need to like really consider the fact that we're also being witnessed and we're in relationship, hopefully safely. And that in and of itself is such a strong tether to capacity, like to having more capacity to handle something, to let something move. So anyways, I think there's just so many components around that is, it really intrigues me. Yeah.
Yeah. So much complexity and nuance, like you're saying. Um, I'm reminded of sort of the other side of it, which is like, how many times have you told people about breath work and they say, oh, you mean you're just hyperventilating?
Mm-hmm.
Or, maybe even writing off the effects of breath work to some sort of hyperventilation syndrome, or, something like that. And what is the difference? Like, why is there a difference between doing holotropic breath work and hyperventilation? I think you could argue that one big component of that is the permission that you're giving to yourself and the way that the inner healer responds to that permission.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and totally agree with what you're saying. Like, there's so much nuance and so much mystery there, and it definitely doesn't make it easy to explain it to people if they haven't experienced it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I really say that from a place of just watching people's experiences. It's not like some theory from my mind, from like a top
Yeah.
down idea. It's really just like watching people, whether it's in somatic work or holotropic breath work, or both, seeing them in both modalities, and just watching, that I think there's a time and a place to be really careful. Um, and then I get really curious about what it means to have done, gone as far down into the well of ourself as we can, and then come to work from that place. I think it's different. And there's a lot of intolerability in our culture around friction. Meaning, like, I think we get really scared of internal friction and tension, meaning like I can come to the edge of something that feels intolerable, or what might be called re-traumatizing, but without that friction I may not actually be able to evolve. It doesn't have enough to like push me in to the next evolution, whatever that is. And then I also think in our culture, we have a really hard time going slow. So I think it's a both and, like, there's like a need for friction to change and intolerability, um, and tension. And Carl Jung talks about the tension of the opposites. Like, if we can learn to stay with that long enough, there's a third energy that can come through, and allow something new to emerge. But oftentimes we don't know how to do that, and I think that's a disservice to our evolution. And then the other side is, I think for me, in my own system, I know that I've really had to learn how to go slow and be gentle and not do all the hard, intense work to create change and transformation. That, um, it's really important to also be with the intolerability of slowing down and composting internal material in a different, more spacious and gentle way, you know. So yeah,
Yeah, I hear you naming that being willing to sit with the natural process and not being able to force it, right? Like, even to go back to making good soil and that composting process, it's not something that you can speed up or accelerate. And there is that value in like letting that soil process or lay fallow for a while
yeah,
in order to enrich it and make it ready for that next cycle of growth or, planting.
yeah. I mean, and I know, like, at least I live in the Pacific Northwest, so we're well into April and it's still, dark and raining, and everybody's like over it, and there's the slow unfurls of the ferns, and different things starting to come, like, pop out, which that's the beauty of long transformation, is the lushness that gets to come is incredible. But there is a tension point, that happens around this time in the spring where you're like, I cannot handle it anymore. Like, I need to come to Arizona, and but if you can stay, which takes a long time, like, there's a time, I'm present to the medicine of time and steadiness and slowness, and there's such a beautiful opening that can happen. So you can't rush the spring blossom.
Yeah. And almost like letting yourself be in that process can be such a support to somebody else. And maybe that's all we can really offer people at the end of the day, is just our presence
Yeah,
and being able to slow down with them, or like match that speed. Maybe even letting them know, like, hey, it's okay to go one beat slower, um, just by showing up.
yeah. It's really like, I feel the full spectrum in what you just said. Like, as somebody who's been in SE, somatic experiencing, for the last 10 to 12 years, and then in the holotropic since I was really young, a couple decades, I've really gotten to live in the, like, feel and understand both. And I still struggle with the slower side. Um, and I think, like, I feel like those are two trainings that go really well in our ability to hold a really wide spectrum of presence. Meaning, can I trust the slow, 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 like the slow drip of movement and change in someone? Because I know that in myself. If that's the way in which their system is moving, and can I really meet that? And then also in the holotropic, like, as you know and have seen, just or psychedelic work or whatever, these, like, massive openings and this intense energy that feels like it is, yeah, it's big energy, and it's fast and it's quick and it's, it has fury. And have I hit those places in myself where I can also trust this movement? um yeah, and I mean, that's a big ask, but
Definitely. Yeah. I've been finding it, as a relative newbie to all this work, a very good compliment. And I've been appreciating finding those complementary aspects, because in the beginning, a couple of years ago, it felt like, well, I'm doing things that are way in opposition to one another. And I would talk to SE people about breath work, and they would go, oh no, like you don't push it and let the nervous system unfold at its own speed. And then, breathwork folks, for the majority of them, when I'd say, yeah, there's this real value in slowing down and letting the nervous system move at its own pace, they would kind of look at me funny, like, no, we're making it bigger here, like let's push it.
Yeah, and I don't know how your training was in SE, but I'd be so curious to talk to this trainer. Maggie Klein was the first 2 years was with her, and I mean, she had such a capacity in her nervous system in her body, and she wasn't like necessarily a slow, calm human at all. But when she would do a what do you call it when someone goes up front, like a
The demo.
demo,
Yeah.
people would have huge processes come up. I mean, they were not slow and they were not soft. They were matching the capacity of the nervous system in front of them. And she would work with it. There was like such an ability to sort of hold form and hold the container wide but steady. And some of the demos that I would see even in early SE training, like, I don't know that I necessarily saw them as slow, or
Yeah.
they just were working through different portals. And I think that's also something to remember, is that, yeah, certainly in breathwork, obviously we're working with the nervous system. Again, I think we have to be careful not to silo these things, like this is the only thing working right now, because we also have to remember we're working with consciousness and this thing that we pretend we understand called the psyche. And then we'll just throw in the word soma in there, like whatever's moving through this body. And again, we pretend we understand all this. And I think, a person who I think knows most about the psyche on this planet that's currently alive is Stan Groff. And even he, at the end of the day, will say, we know very little about the psyche, because he is constantly in awe of, the process that people are capable of when they feel safe. I mean, I think we have to remember, like, this idea that I've seen this to be true, and I don't know if it's the truth. I'll just say that it might be true that we go as far into our process as our psyche, our nervous system, whatever, our being feels safe enough to do. Like, it knows the container that's there. And it's not that people don't get in trouble and go into processes that the container can't hold. That happens. But yeah, I think there's something to be said about our our capacity to know safety when we're in it. And as a result, these parts get to come through, and they know, that the container can or can't hold it. And then maybe we can also trust rupture a little bit more. I think we get really scared of rupture, but I don't think that that's reasonable, because we're humans holding space for humans. And again, I think if we've done our own work enough, that we're going to have the integrity possible to be in repair. And to me, that's really valuable material. And I'm an edge walker, so, like, not everybody would say this, but if a rupture happens because I screw up, like, how valuable is it that I get to come in and be a person that has enough capacity to say, hey, let's talk about this. And then that gets to be repair for both parties, because that's something that never got to happen in childhood. So I think it is also like, how do we get honest about our own humanity enough? I mean, it's not about being saints. It's about being honest.
Yeah, being human.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that honesty. And and I think it also, to me, comes back into this idea that it's we're just there. All we can do is show up and be present, and attend to the mystery, that there's these things outside of our understanding. And yeah, like you're saying, not pretending like I know everything. um, I, I'm really finding some resonance, and one of the things I like about having this platform is having conversations that then there's certain moments that will end up sort of sticking with me. And like I'll be going into work and doing SE and breath work with people later on today. What's really staying with me in this moment is like trusting rupture, and the capacity to repair it, um, and the value in that. And even almost what came up for me as you were saying it as well was the some of the teachings from Tibetan Buddhism of like Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche of like adversity reveals your hidden faults, and that
Yeah.
like what a teacher adversity and failure can be. And that as a practitioner you should almost be like not seeking it out, like seeking to make mistakes, but really being honest about your own edges and where you have more work to do, so that you can continue to like deepen your own process, rather than like, oh, I have to be perfect and I have to show up in this perfect facade.
Yeah.
Because that's where that shadow can hide out and create those blind spots or inadequacies as a
Mm-hmm.
facilitator.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, to me, that's the most dangerous part of any of this is, um, if I could pull the thread that I personally think is the most dangerous, it's not being honest about our shadow, I mean, a lot of us are not. That's why it's called shadow. But let's just say not being honest about our humanity, not knowing how to, um, especially when we live in a culture of like, perfectionism, culture that really highly reveres credentials over actual skill. Um, you know, God bless them, and I'm a part of these programs, but like, yeah, we're teaching people how to hold psilocybin space for people in 9 months. And it's just, a lot of that training being online, and which is, you know, fine. And like, it just is not enough time to get honest with where our blind spots are. And not that we have to have the light shown on them, but just to know, like, oh, I have stuff that exists over in that corner, and I'm working it out. Just again, it's like an honesty factor that doesn't come through information overload, or test taking. And so that's why I like the holotropic training, because you don't really get out of there without being honest.
Yeah, you're speaking to a really important point with psychedelics coming so much more out into the mainstream.
Yeah.
Is the value of having someone there to support you that has done their own work. So regardless of the modality that you're using to get into that expanded state,
Right.
just the value of having someone there to support that has done that. So besides for sharing, hey, keep doing your own work and give yourself time maybe before you are working with clients, what else are you recommending or teaching to these new facilitators to help prepare them for the work that they're going to be doing?
Maybe the word is like, noticing urgency, urgency to be a part of the space in a certain way. And just because I think, I mean, if we go back to the nervous system, like urgency is a trauma response. It's not real connection. It's not coming from like the pelvis of somebody. It's coming from a need that is not fair to put into or onto the space that they're going to be participating in, you know. So I think urgency, and like the reality is we all have it, you know. I'm in like a couple new training or just like programs, and I'm like, you know, get me there. So it's just like being aware of those like threads of urgency that live in us, because this is so much, I think, a part of the paradigm we live in that gets us in trouble, is like, yeah, being able to, this is where the slowing down, I think, really gives us, is it like keeps us honest, is like, what is the urgency really about? Like, what do I think I'm going to get if I get to do this sooner rather than later? And what would it be like to relate to this form? Or what would it be like to relate to this from essence rather than form? Because I think urgency relates to form, the form of something, rather than the essence of something. The essence of something is sure, you know, and trusting. It feels like a little bit of a koan in my body when I say it, but
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, I'm really glad that you brought that up, because it's been sort of in the back of my mind for part of this conversation, is like this, I guess the way I would say it is, where does confidence in your own inner healer or your own process fit into all this, and the reverence and respect for what you're walking into? And I can give an example from my own life. Um, on Sunday, Sarai and I did a workshop, and we had 4 breathers. And before the workshop and after the workshop, I felt really confident.
Mm-hmm.
There's been times where I've walked into a facilitation, whether it's SE or, coaching or breath work, where I notice there's a lot of nervousness, or, like that anxiousness, or just, oh, wow, like what's going to happen here? And working with that, like attending to it, managing it. And before and after, I felt really confident, not in an arrogant way, just like I can show up and meet this with whatever happens. And then in the workshop itself, especially in the beginning, it was almost like sort of checking that confidence at the door and saying, okay, like this is not the place to be overconfident. Just be open and aware and like present,
Mm-hmm.
but also still feeling like, you know what, I'm pretty sure that whatever is going to happen in this workshop, I can show up, and I can be with it. I can support um, these folks. Um, and we had this conversation on the way back. We were driving, back, and she said, "Yeah, I thought that went really well." And I said, "Yes, me too."
Yeah.
And she's like, "Well, okay, like it was almost wasn't okay, like okay the way I answered." And she said, "Well, what do you mean?" And I said, "Well, I expect it to go well.
Mm-hmm.
Like I've done it enough times where I feel like, yes, I expect things to go well, and of course I'm going to prepare, and of course I'm going to like do my own work to show up so that it goes well, but I'm not walking into it going, okay, what's going to happen here?" Like I trust the process enough, I suppose.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's been a big part of my own work, is like finding that balance between confidence and, humility, and still being, like you said, being that apprentice, being that learner, with also just saying, you know what, I trust in myself, and I trust that I'm prepared to walk into this situation and be able to show up.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, I hear you. I mean, I mean, I love that. I think, can I be like a little bit,
Yeah,
um, maybe would be perceived as like, devil's advocate?
please.
Yeah, I mean, the first question I had was like when and now I'm with you. It's just like, what do you, yeah, like how do you define confidence? Because it's, for some reason I'm realizing it's not really part of my vernacular. Like it doesn't exist, like it doesn't quite exist in the field in this space as easily as maybe others, but I want to know like what it means to you, because I think it's,
Mm.
I think I, yeah.
Yeah, it's hard to describe. To me, it's almost like a somatic experience. And I know that in the beginning of starting to do this work, there was like a lack of confidence. Like there was maybe a fear of, okay, what if something happens and it, you know, something goes wrong? Or what if I make a mistake? Um, what if there is a rupture?
Right, right.
And somewhere along the way, I realized that I don't usually feel that way.
Yeah,
Um, and maybe like that I have confidence that if there is a mistake or a rupture, that it's going to be okay. Like I'm not going to fall apart, and it doesn't reflect on who I am as a person.
yeah,
Um, and that I'm confident walking into a situation and saying, okay, I can show up here and, you know, take a deep breath and like do my work.
yeah. Yeah, and I think I thank you for answering that, because my sense of it was like, or like my curiosity was, is that, does that actually just mean that you are trusting people's inner healers?
Yeah,
Like
I think
there's
so.
a movement toward being in right relationship with other through trusting their inner wisdom, and your capacity and willingness to meet that, which
Yeah,
first of all takes you out of the role, like that power dynamic, right? But also
right.
just like, I know for me, and then I don't, again, I don't want to change your words or meaning, but that confidence piece comes because I'm like, oh, I trust you.
Yeah,
Like I trust you and what emerges, and then I trust myself to meet that, and that's it.
yeah.
Meaning I trust myself that in the moment, whatever emerges, that I can trust that emergence. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for naming that, because I do think that that's what it is. Like I'm not here to change anybody or heal them. All I have to do is be there and meet their inner healer, or as it's emerging, with presence. And I know you mentioned it earlier in the conversation, but you know, just to name that, you know, Diana Medina that teaches a lot of these holotropic modules, that's been one of those lessons that's really stuck with me as well. Is that she said, you know, fairly recently, in that I heard it, was, I trust in your inner healer until you trust in your inner healer, you
Mhm.
know, just to kind of paraphrase. And for me, like being working in a residential treatment facility with a lot of pain and a lot of trauma, I feel like has helped me learn to trust that inner healer even more.
Mhm. Mhm.
And certainly there are times where that gets tested. And there's times where I'm like, whoa, I'm feeling that this doesn't feel safe in my body. But I also feel like the experience of working with people at that stage of their journey has helped me and my capacity to be able to hold that and trust
Mm,
in their own, you know, their own inner wisdom and
totally.
how it's emerging, in a different way that I didn't have
Yeah.
a few years ago before I started, you know, that experience.
Yeah. I love that. Yeah.
Because like, if, oh my god, if I was walking in there going, okay, who do I need to fix today,
Exactly. Yeah.
oh my god, I would have burnt out long long
Exactly.
time ago.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, and sometimes it's funny because like someone will be sitting in my office and I'll say, so what do you like, what do you want to get out of this session? And they're like, I don't know, like, what do you want to do? Or what are you going to, I'm like, this is your time,
Mhm.
like whether we're sitting here and just talking,
Yeah.
or whether we're getting into some like deep SE work or some breath work, this is really your time. I'm here to support you and walk alongside you, not, I don't have a clipboard of like, okay, here's the things we need to fix in this person.
Right. And I think that so speaks to one of the things I'm very clear on, and I feel very, have a lot of grief about, and I have a lot of, it is also the thing that motivates me to stay in this work in this way, meaning like any work I do with this idea that I know you have an inner wisdom and I'm going to trust in it until you do, is I feel so devoted to that, because I have seen over and over, through different populations, different ages, different genders, different whatever, it doesn't matter, that one of the things I am certain about is we are so committed to giving our power away.
Hmm.
It's so entrenched in our energetic signature, um, whether that's from our early home lives, but to pull the ring out of imprint to just this is so much of the system we live in and the culture we live in. And I just keep seeing it over and over, and what an act of care and love in a moment where someone says, well, what do you want? And you go, let's figure out what your body needs. Or just all the ways in which we try to give power away. And then if we're not really careful, it's so easy to take that in and on, because it seems like it gives us something, but it doesn't. You know, it also gives us way more responsibility than I think we actually want. And it just continues to serve a system of disempowerment in a lot of subtle and profound ways. So any of those moments where we get to go, no, let's ask, like, let's ask your body, or, well, why don't you sit with that, or, well, let's explore some options together, to me is a radical act of resistance, you know. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a real, I don't know, it's been a real educational experience for me to, to work with that population. And I know you do addiction work yourself.
Mm-hmm.
So it's, you're getting to meet people at so many different places in the
Yeah.
work that you do. And one of the things that I feel like that's shown me is not the differences between people, but the similarity.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, like that we're all seeking that wholeness,
Mm.
regardless of kind of where we are in the process.
Yeah. Yeah, totally agreed. Yeah, we're just like friends on the journey. I love that quote by Pema Chodron that says something like, compassion is not a relationship between the wounded and the healed. It's a relationship between equals. Only when we know our own darkness well can we sit in the dark with another and be a light. True, something like true compassion comes when we understand our shared humanity. And that feels like medicine to me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love her.
Mm-hmm.
Um, what are some of the things that you do for yourself that like help you stay in this place where you are good soil for, for your work and for supporting other people?
Yeah, I mean, I really try to maintain a daily practice, of, um, I mean, I say it's like a contemplative practice because sometimes I sit with tea, I have a tea practice, traditional tea, um, which comes with a lot of sort of, contemplation and reflection, and, try to like continue a meditation process, or I try to be in shared group spaces. I do a weekly group of authentic movement where I continue to listen to these subtle impulses of my body, and I do that in witness space, and I keep trying to do expanded state work if I'm going to hold that space for others. And yeah, I mean, it's a lot. I try to really stay close to community and continue to tend my threads of intimacy, so that I'm not, another thing is like just being really clear on like if there's needs that are not met in my life, like not getting them met through this work, and so it feels important to just be really clear on like where my spiritual and relational connections are. And it's a full-time job for most of us, right? So yeah, I have a therapist, a somatic practitioner, continue to work with them. So it takes a village.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, no, that speaks to being able to, or being willing rather, to continue to do your own work along with us. And that's something else that that Diana said to me recently. It was like I learned more after the certification was done than during the training. So of course the support and integration of that would have to continue as well.
Exactly.
The way I like to close the show is asking the guest what their vital point is. The name, the vital point, comes from this Dzogchen, Buddhist teaching of the three statements that strike the vital point. And my vital point is always like, no matter the method that you're practicing, the important thing is to actually practice it. Like, it's not enough to just listen to a podcast. There needs to be some sort of integration and action. So I'm wondering if there's something in your work or just in your life, or maybe that even came up as a result of this conversation, that feels important to share as your vital point.
Well, I'm inclined to go back to the first question and statement that we made. And right now, I think what does feel relevant is the point of continuing to allow myself to be made good soil.
I appreciate you bringing that in. And I know that you weren't like sitting there with your phone going, look at this, like, but it certainly had an impact on me, and gave me, I think, a little bit of an insight into who you are, and also like sparked my curiosity for like, oh, this is someone I'd like to have a conversation with, and just listen to and learn from. And I'm looking forward to coming and working with you soon, and continuing to develop there and get my first apprenticeship in.
Yes. Yeah, I can't wait.
Yeah.
I look forward to that.
Yeah. So I really appreciate, you taking the time to share your wisdom and experience with the audience here.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. It's a true honor. Thank you for the work that you're doing here and the platform you've created, and it's important.
That's it for today's conversation on The Vital Point. Huge thanks to Christine Calvert for joining us. You can find their work at alchemicalnectar.com or ccalvert on Instagram. I'll put both of those links on the show page. If this episode supported your path, leave us a review. Consider sharing it with a friend. And if you're looking to go deeper, you can join me inside the Blue Magic Alchemy community on School, skool.com/Blue Magic Alchemy, or go directly to bluemagicalchemy.com to explore my private coaching work. Until next time, keep growing, keep exploring, and above all, keep practicing, because that's the vital point.